Hi guys, so Feud's finale was last night and it was the best episode of the whole season in my opinion. It was really well done. The whole show was really well done, but the finale really actually got to me. So, I have a lot to talk about with this episode. There's a lot of symbolism and a lot of commentary that was put into this episode. So I'm going to start with a little recap of the episode, and then I'm going to, in between, talk about some of the things that were meant by some of the scenes. So let's get started. So we start with seeing Pauline going in for the interview, and she's talking about Joan. And basically, the first part of the episode is about Joan and her struggles. So Pauline is talking about how she saw her at one point at LaGuardia Airport, and she saw her just kind of like a broken down person. Joan had completely, she's just kind of not as relevant at that point, and it's really hard to see, especially when she put her hand on her arm and she called Pauline an old friend. And if you guys remember from previous episodes, Joan wasn't very nice to Pauline, especially when she wanted to try to make a directorial debut. So for her to really acknowledge her as a friend, that's something from Joan. That's something you wouldn't expect. So we basically see a montage of Joan and what she's become, and they start with the year 1969, and this was a few years after the success of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and after she lost the role in Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte. So she's struggling on her own. She's now in an apartment. She no longer has her mansion, and Mamacita had left, and so basically she's doing things on her own now, and it's really interesting to see. She struggles, but at the same time, she's not 100% miserable with her lifestyle. She tries to find happiness in it. Like, she even gets a little puppy, which, oh, that thing was so cute. But she's just trying to survive at this point, and it's really interesting to see how she does that. And at the end of the montage, Mamacita actually comes back, and she offers her services for part-time. So I thought that was a really nice way to start the episode. And basically, at one point, Joan goes to meet with her agent, and he mentions that there's a movie role for her, and unfortunately, this is a B movie, and according to IMDb, it's worse than a B movie. It's called Trog, and it was basically like a missing link kind of story. And that movie just says how much Joan has fallen. She's doing these movies that really aren't well written and poorly executed. And another thing that her agent mentions is that they want to do a book about Joan, like her lifestyle, how she gets ready, how she does this, how she does that. So while we're seeing her film the movie Trog, she's talking about her lifestyle, and you see that it's kind of, there's a bit of an irony to what she's saying and to what's actually going on in her daily routine. So that was also another really interesting scene, and it just really kind of, it makes you realize that it really is kind of an illusion sometimes, the way people say things are and compared to what's actually going on. So that scene was well done. We get to see Betty, what she's doing. She's doing some small roles here and there, but she's still working. She keeps moving on, which is interesting to see the difference between Joan and Betty, how they're doing and how they're handling the time changes and everything. I especially noticed with the wardrobe, Joan does not change her wardrobe. She stays as much as she can in the past, but Betty, she actually changes with the time. So that was really interesting to see. And so Betty hears at one point that Joan has cancer, and she wants to call Joan. She actually does. She hears Joan on the other line, and what strikes her, I'm pretty sure, is that she hears how fragile Joan is. She's never heard any weakness in her voice. She's seen her downfall, but she's never heard her without the strength in her voice. So I think that kind of turned her off from wanting to talk to her. I think because she really wanted to have it like old times, like you say something sassy, I say something sassy, that kind of thing. But she knew at that moment that it wasn't going to be like that anymore. And she just hung up the phone. So that was a really interesting scene as well. So at one point, Joan's daughter, one of her adopted daughters, she was one of the twins that we saw in the earlier episode. And she comes to visit with her children. And we actually get to see Joan as a grandmother, which is interesting. She's very kind, very loving towards them. She's really become easygoing at this point. And I think the year was 1977 at this point, which is the year of Joan's death. So they're having a nice visit, and Kathy Crawford is her name. She's talking to Joan and saying that she really appreciates that she adopted her and her sister out of all the children in the world. And she's really appreciative and loving towards Joan, which is really nice. Because I know there was the Mommy Dearest movie, another adopted daughter, Christina. She had a book, and there was a lot of controversy between their relationship. But this was really a different relationship between Kathy and Joan. So we'll never know exactly what things were, but in the show it was a really nice scene. So let's hope that there were actually good feelings towards each other. But I like that scene because it really showed the impact Joan had on somebody's life, which you realize at that point in her life she didn't feel like she had an impact on anyone's life. So for her daughter to say those things to her was really touching to her. So this is where we get into a really deep scene. Joan is in bed and she suddenly hears voices, and at this point I'm wondering what's gonna happen. Is she dying, or is she going into the afterlife at somehow, or... But anyway, just my thoughts aside, the scene is where Joan walks out into her living room and she sees Hedda Hopper and Jack Warner at a table, and they're having a conversation, and Joan joins them in a younger form. So this is almost kind of like seeing the immortal lives of these people. It was really fascinating to watch. And the scene was this was the best scene, I think, in this episode. It's a hallucination, but it says a lot. This scene, the writers had creativity to say what they wanted to say, to give their commentary. And so they're having a conversation. It's very friendly. It's like the old days. They're being silly with each other. But at the same time, they're saying serious things. Like, Betty comes in and she actually points out that Hedda and Jack made Joan the way she was, which kind of led to her downfall, was the idea, and why she was never really happy. And Joan does point out that because of them and others like them, she had to pretend to be someone she wasn't, because that was the only way to succeed, really. And it was just this moment that was so well written, and something you would never hear Joan say out loud, but something you can imagine she was thinking inside. And she points out that she doesn't know who she is because she's been this person for so long. She created Joan Crawford to please people, to make people love her, and just, it's this moment where you realize this still exists. We try so hard to impress people because we want to get where we want to get. And at the same time, sometimes we lose ourselves and we don't know who we are anymore. So that's really something deep for Joan to say. And Betty says you should apologize. She tells Jack and Hedda that you should apologize to Joan for making her feel that way, for making her do those things. And they're about to apologize, and then all of them laugh. And I was thinking in that moment, that sounds about right. No one is ever going to apologize, because that's the world. That's all I can honestly get from that, because it's hard to explain, but this is the world that has been, and this is the world that is. People are not going to apologize for you changing your image to please them. It's something that we have control of, and something that it's our choice. Yes, they make us do it, but at the same time we have the choice not to. And it's hard to admit that sometimes, but I know that's the truth. But at the same time, so I heard this recently, and I've heard it over and over again. I watch a lot of Broadway, and what's interesting is some people say the best thing you can be is yourself, especially in show business, because no one has you. There is not a you in that business. And we spend all our lives thinking we have to be somebody else to get into the business of show business. And sometimes any business, really. But the best person you can be is yourself. If someone had told Joan Crawford, Bette Davis that, maybe we wouldn't have what we got from them, but maybe they would have been happier. So just that moment really spoke to me. I don't know about you guys, but just beautifully written. And even Jack Horner points out that they suffer, they go through the pain so they can bring joy to the world. I think there's a way you can do that, you can bring joy to the world, but you don't have to suffer for it. I still believe that. And I hope that is changing in the world. I really do. Okay, sorry, I was getting emotional with that one. So, to continue the scene, Hedda and Jack exit the scene, and it's now Joan and Betty talking. And this scene really got to me. They're talking about their lives, and at one point, Betty's like, let's play a game of regret. And Joan goes first, and she says she regrets not being more generous with Betty. Like, not sharing the spotlight with her, not treating her as an equal. And when Betty's turn comes, she says, I wish I had been a friend to you. And that still brings tears to me. Because why couldn't they have been friends? It really would have been a nice thing. Especially in that business where they're struggling, where they had something in common. They could have been the best of friends and supported each other. And there were times when it almost happened, but media and the studios just kept tearing them apart. And they let it happen. So that was a really touching line, I thought. And just beautifully executed by Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon. They played these roles so well. But this scene just spoke volumes about what could have been the actual regrets somebody could actually have. And just so well written. So, at one point, Joan calls Mamacita and tells her to bring champagne for Betty, and this is where Mamacita comes in and she tells Joan there's no one there, and all of a sudden we see present time Joan, and we realize that Joan is really losing it, but at the same time she's really having these regrets. And Mamacita says that a week later after that she actually died. And this was another interesting thing that Mamacita said. She mentions that all these people came to Joan's funeral. It was all a big thing, not as big as Judy Garland, but still, it was a big funeral with all these stars. And Mamacita says it made her sad, not because Joan died, but because all these people came to her funeral, but when she was alive, no one was there for her. When she needed people, no one was there. And again, that speaks volumes, even today. There are so many stories where an actor passes away, and all of a sudden, there's all this love for them on Facebook, on all kinds of social media. Everybody's paying tribute to them. Everybody's saying how much they love them. It's really, like, we do feel that way, but it's too late. They're not gonna know. That's why we have to tell people when they're around how much we appreciate them. It's just been so common for the last century and into this century, where we just take everything for granted. And I'm not saying everybody does this, but a lot of people do. So I really liked that lesson that Mamacita gave us. And I'm going to get emotional again. I'm trying really hard not to cry right now. This finale just was so beautiful. So to finish with Bette Davis, she goes to visit Margot, her child who, she has autism, I believe. She talks to her and she's telling her all these things that have been going on. And at one point she mentions her mother and how she, even though her mother was around, she wasn't really a friend to her. And she felt very alone. Oh, great. Hold on. Okay, I swear, every time I'm doing a video, the phone rings. I don't know why. It's not even anyone I know. Okay. Sorry. Back to the show. So, Bette Davis she's saying that she feels alone, and it's just the truth, really, why a lot of people get into show business, because they want to feel loved. They want to feel like there's people on their side. So it's just another thing that is true. So we get to the Academy Awards in 1978, and everyone is there. Olivia de Havilland, Victor Buono, I believe is his name. But just everyone is there, and they're watching the In Memoriam, and they see Joan for 2 seconds, and then they move on to the next person, and they point out that's all Joan gets after 50 years of show business, just 2 seconds. And Betty says that's all any of us will get, and that's true. It's very interesting how it works. But at the same time, there is a legacy. These people have not been forgotten. And hopefully they never will be. So, to end the show here, Betty is approached by the guy who's been making the documentary about their feud, and Betty does not want to do an interview. She doesn't want to talk about Joan. She really has strong feelings about everything. Even when she heard that Joan had died, she said something like, "My mother told me not to say anything bad about the dead, only good." And then she says, "Joan is dead, good." Which I think I heard that wasn't entirely the case, how she responded to it, but I'm not positive. But anyway, she doesn't want to do the interview, and they're talking about how they'll never really know the story about Bette and Joan. And his assistant wonders what the first day of set was after all those years of their feud. And we see Joan and Bette sitting in their chairs together, and this is actually based on the picture of them together. And they're talking, and they're being friendly, and they have to go get ready for the scene. And Joan tells Bette, "I hope by the end of this production I've made a friend." And Bette replies, "I hope so too." But yeah, I'm not positive if that scene was meant to be that's what actually happened, or that's an ideal scene, like what we wish would have been, or what they wished would have been. Because like we saw, Joan wished that she and Bette had been friends. So yeah, the scene ends there, the show's over, and we see the tributes to all of the actual people, what happened to them and everything. But, oh my god, this show, so well written. Even if everything's not 100% accurate, because it's hard to know if everything's 100% accurate. Even when the people themselves tell the stories, we don't know if they're exaggerating or telling a lie sometimes. But just, this whole show was amazing. I love what it taught. I love what it exploited. It was just brilliant. And I'm really excited to see the next season of Feud, which I believe will be Princess Diana and Charles. So, that'll be a very interesting season. Definitely a lot to work off of there. But this first season of Feud, it's going to be hard to beat because it was well done. And there are some things I didn't mention from the episode, but it's basically like Bette still having trouble with her daughter and even her grandchildren. She's not handling that too well. Joan quit show business because she didn't like how she looked anymore, and she felt the fool continuing to work like that. And just all these things that really show you these people, that show you a human personality to these stars that we've known for years. So, just everything was well done. Like I said, Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon gave phenomenal performances. And just, I really hope the show does well at the Emmys. I'm sure it's going to, but I feel like we're going to hear that theme music play a lot at the Emmys. Alright, I'm going to end it here, and I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I'm excited for season 2 of Feud, and hopefully I'll see you guys for season 2 of Feud. Alright. Goodbye, guys, and remember, be yourselves, love yourselves, be good people, make friends, and just make sure the world changes for the better. That's what the show, it's not just about the feud, it's about what we can do to make things better. Alright, I'm going to end it here, and I hope you guys are well and having a good day, and I'll see you later. Bye!